No babysitter in the wealthy Kensington estate ever lasted more than a week. The Triplets, three identical whirlwinds of chaos, were infamous in the neighborhood for breaking spirits, leaving seasoned nannies in tears, and turning calm homes into battlegrounds. Parents whispered warnings, job boards carried desperate pleas, and house staff tiptoed around the children as if they were small hurricanes waiting to erupt. Then came the unexpected, someone no one would have considered. A black cook, quiet and steady, who had never been hired for anything beyond the kitchen, stepped forward. What happened next wasn't just survival, it was transformation. And soon the impossible became undeniable. The Kensington estate stood tall like a monument of wealth and tradition, with sprawling gardens, glittering chandeliers, and staff that operated like a finely tuned machine. On the outside, the house projected perfection. But on the inside, perfection was impossible. At the center of it all were the Triplets, three identical 6-year-olds whose boundless energy and cunning mischief had become legendary. No day was ever quiet, no moment ever truly safe from their tricks. Their parents, wealthy socialites consumed by travel, business deals, and social galas, had long struggled to maintain order at home. Nannies came and went like seasons, some lasted a few days, others a mere afternoon. Broken furniture, torn clothes, endless tantrums, and sleepless nights were only part of the chaos. The children's wild defiance seemed unbreakable, and whispers grew among the household staff. Perhaps the Triplets were simply unmanageable, yet not everyone was convinced. In the kitchen, where laughter mixed with the smell of fresh bread and simmering stews, worked a man named Elijah. He was a cook by title, but far more by character, patient, kind, and deeply observant. The family had barely noticed him beyond his food, but the staff knew. Elijah saw what others overlooked. Where most saw impossible children, he noticed loneliness in their eyes, frustration hidden in their giggles, and a hunger that wasn't just for sweets or treats. When the latest babysitter stormed out after less than 48 hours, the mansion echoed with exasperation. The parents prepared to seek yet another professional, but Elijah quietly stepped forward with a simple offer. He would watch the children. The idea seemed absurd, yet it was about to change everything. The first morning Elijah took charge of the Triplets, the mansion staff whispered in disbelief. Some chuckled under their breath, wagering how long he would last. 2 hours at most, the butler muttered. Others shook their heads, certain this would end like every other attempt. After all, what could a cook, someone who chopped vegetables and stirred pots, know about controlling 3 storm-like children who thrived on breaking spirits? The Triplets themselves saw it as a game. As soon as their parents' car disappeared down the driveway, they launched their usual tricks. Buckets of marbles spilled down the hallway, expensive vases teetered on the brink of falling, and shrieks of rebellion echoed through the estate. One twin locked the library door, another smeared jam across the white sofas, and the third threatened to climb the chandelier. For most adults, this storm of chaos meant instant surrender, but Elijah did not yell. He did not chase. Instead, he quietly moved about, observing with the patience of a man who had lived through storms far greater than children's pranks. He cleaned the jam with a calm hand, unlocked the library with a gentle knock, and coaxed the chandelier climber down with nothing more than a steady gaze. The children frowned, confused. Where was the explosion of anger they craved? Where was the proof that they had won? By lunchtime, they were plotting their next rebellion. They expected Elijah to serve them like royalty, as nannies often had in desperation. But when they entered the kitchen, they found him sitting at the long table, 3 simple plates of sandwiches before him. "Sit if you're hungry," he said. His tone wasn't commanding, yet it carried weight. The children hesitated. No one had ever spoken to them like that. Not as wild creatures to be managed, but as humans with choices. One by one, curiosity won over defiance, and they sat. Days passed, and the staff noticed changes. The endless tantrums grew shorter, the pranks less cruel. Elijah did not use fear or bribes. He introduced stories, games that taught patience, and even chores disguised as challenges. Instead of punishing them for their boundless energy, he redirected it, teaching them to knead dough, slice fruit, or build towers that required cooperation rather than destruction. Slowly, laughter replaced screams and curiosity replaced defiance. Yet not everyone was pleased. The parents, rarely home, heard only snippets of gossip. And some staff, bound by prejudice, scoffed at the idea that a black cook could succeed where trained professionals had failed. "It's luck," they whispered. "The storm will return." And when the children's grandparents visited, they sneered openly at Elijah, dismissing him as the help, insisting the family should hire someone proper instead. The triplets, however, were changing in ways no one could deny. One evening, when their mother returned unexpectedly, she froze at the sight before her. The three notorious terrors sitting quietly around the kitchen table, flour dusted across their noses, proudly showing Elijah their freshly baked bread. It was more than discipline she saw, it was trust. But whispers of doubt lingered in the household. Prejudice had deep roots, and some would rather see Elijah fail than accept that dignity, patience, and love could succeed where wealth and authority had not. What none of them realized was that the true test, the moment that would shatter all doubts, was yet to come. It happened on a stormy Friday night. The parents were hosting an important dinner upstairs, a gathering of investors and high society guests whose approval could shape the family's fortune. The children, as usual, were supposed to be kept out of sight. But storms have a way of exposing truths, and on this night the mansion would not remain calm. One of the triplets, upset that their parents left without a good-night hug, slipped away from Elijah's watchful eye and darted into the grand dining hall. Within moments the other two followed, giggling with mischief. Gasps echoed as three flour-dusted children burst into a room filled with crystal chandeliers and polished silver. A waiter stumbled, nearly spilling champagne on a guest worth millions. Whispers rose sharply. Out of control again. No wonder nannies never stay. All eyes turned to Elijah as he entered the hall. For many it was a setup for humiliation. Here was the black cook, dragged into the spotlight, expected to fail spectacularly in front of the family's most powerful allies. The grandparents smirked, certain this was the moment their warnings would be proven right. But Elijah did not panic. Instead, he walked calmly toward the children, who were now halfway through climbing onto the grand table, threatening to turn the elegant dinner into a circus. The tension was unbearable. Guests whispered. The parents' faces burned with embarrassment, and the staff stood frozen. Elijah knelt down, lowering himself to the children's level, his voice steady and calm, yet carrying through the entire hall. He reminded them of the story they had begun in the kitchen that afternoon, a story about three siblings who wanted to prove they were strong, not through chaos, but through unity. Slowly, the children's wild energy stilled. They exchanged glances, then clambered down from the table, each taking Elijah's hand. The room went silent. In less than a minute, what should have been a disaster transformed into quiet order. The children sat obediently beside Elijah, who guided them to a corner table he had prepared earlier with crayons and warm food. Instead of anger, the children smiled with pride as if they had just accomplished something important. The guests were stunned. Whispers turned to awe. Some even applauded quietly, unable to deny the respect this man had earned. The parents, too shocked to speak, could only watch as Elijah did what 15 professional babysitters could not. He tamed the storm, not with fear, but with dignity and love. That night, the mansion learned the truth. This was not luck. This was greatness. When the last guest departed and the laughter faded from the great dining hall, the parents called Elijah into the study. The storm outside had calmed, but within the house, silence carried weight. For the first time, the mother's voice trembled, not with command, but with gratitude. She admitted what no one in the family had ever dared to confess aloud. Without Elijah, the household would have crumbled. The triplets, usually so restless, had refused to go to bed until they said goodnight to him. They clung to his arms, their little hands refusing to let go, their eyes wide with the kind of love that cannot be faked. These were the same children who had driven away every other caretaker, yet with Elijah they had found not just discipline, but safety. Word of the dinner incident spread beyond the mansion. Investors whispered not about the children's antics, but about the man who brought calm where chaos reigned. Some even remarked that if he could command respect from three untamable children, he had qualities fit for leadership far beyond a kitchen. For once, the conversation wasn't about his skin color or his role as a cook. It was about his character, his strength, and the undeniable impact he carried. But the story's most profound effect was not on the guests or the parents. It was on the children themselves. In Elijah, they saw someone who treated them not as burdens or embarrassments, but as individuals capable of greatness. He didn't scold them for being too much. He guided them into becoming more. Years later, those same triplets would remember the cook who saw in them not problems but potential. And that seed he planted would shape their futures in ways their wealthy surroundings never could. For Elijah, the night wasn't about applause or validation. It was about proving something deeper, that resilience, love, and patience can dismantle prejudice better than anger ever could. He had been underestimated, judged, and dismissed by a household that only saw his position and his color. Yet he walked away not only victorious but also necessary, irreplaceable, unforgettable. This story reminds us of a truth society often tries to bury. Greatness is not confined to wealth, titles, or appearances. Sometimes it emerges from the most overlooked places, carried by those who refuse to be broken by bias. So ask yourself, how many Elijahs walk among us today, unseen, underestimated, and dismissed? And how much stronger would our world be if, instead of looking past them, we recognized their worth? Because in the end, Elijah did more than care for 3 restless children. He taught a mansion, a family, and an audience far beyond those walls that dignity, patience, and love are forces powerful enough to change the impossible.